Salutations, ladies and doom. Welcome to Podcast The Storm, where social awkward outcasts, crazy weirdos, and all around nerds convene to talk and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my co-host, the nerdy occultist, aka the Authenticator, Dalton L. Mortimer.
Hello, everyone. We are once again playing semi catch up because frankly, I didn't know whether Brainstormer wanted to do anything for the anniversary this time around, and he had forgotten. So between my attempt to be polite and not remind him of shit and his forgetfulness, we are catching up on an anniversary episode that we should have done last week but did not because dumb. Someday we will be professionals, folks, but today is not that day, and an endless series of tomorrows probably won't be that day either. But someday we'll do it right. I swear to God. Not
Okay,
sure.
sorry, I was getting the thing set up.
Yep. As per usual, we're doing a video response for milestone episodes, so buckle in, folks. Back to the old grind we go.
Okay, yeah, so we're gonna try and finish the pacifist propaganda. Superman number 775 is Pacifist Propaganda by the Lotus Eaters. Obviously, we're starting. Nope. God damn it.
Yeah, we're starting from where we left off 9 episodes ago, give or take an episode. So if you wish to see the first half of this video response, check out episode 300. I think. Unless we messed up last time too, which is not impossible, but I'm pretty sure it's 300 where we last butted heads with these chuckle fucks.
Alright, although I might skip it back like maybe 30 seconds just so we have context. Or
Yeah, the full context of whatever point they were making at the time.
yeah.
But commence with the banana, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Banana.
So it's interesting because Lex Luthor gets a briefing from Lois, who's head of Metahuman Affairs, Lex's president at this time, and she says that both the NATO, OPEC, the UN, and the rest.
Can you turn up the volume? I'm having a hard time hearing it.
Actually, hold on. Let me check to see if I remember to. I might have forgotten to have the audio.
Yeah, I was still hearing something, but it was coming in really muffled. I think it was because it was coming through your headset mic for some reason.
God damn it. Fucking hate this thing. Okay, hold on. We are professionals, people. I swear.
Yeah, someday, but today is not that day. Tomorrow won't likely be that day either. But one
Okay,
day,
let me-
one brave and magnificent day, we will actually be cool. But not today.
Okay. All right. Tell me if you hear this.
Hour slant, because at one point,
Yep,
I forget what
there
his
it
name is,
goes.
Manchester
Now
Black.
it's better.
Okay.
There we go.
I might have too low as well. Okay.
Yeah, but it's fine now. Huzzah.
Okay.
Banana.
Give me. Just let me put this in large screen. All right. Banana.
Isn't
Banana.
it? Manchester Black says to Superman that you're a far-right fascist, almost in a way that's supposed to make me be on side with Superman, going like, he's not a fascist. What are you on about? This is just some lefty nonsense. But everything else he says about
is
the
the
reality,
neoliberal paradigm, yeah. So it's interesting because Lex Luthor gets a briefing from Amanda Waller, who's his head of metahuman affairs, because Lex is president at this time, and she says that conversely, NATO, OPEC, the UN, and the rest demanding a response to this fascistic act of brutality. So that immediately...
Okay. According to you, everything else he says is reasonable. According to anyone who knows about what Superman is as a character, no. Superman is idealism, compassion, altruism, and leaning toward pacifism almost to a fault. Obviously, his pacifism isn't entirely non-negotiable because he does, frequently have to hit things quite hard and etc. But as a general rule, where Batman is the Dark Knight, Superman is the Shining Knight, so to speak. He's the Galahad. He's the King Arthur. The symbol of purity and decency and altruism and goodness. Now, mind you, there's room for both of these perspectives, and this is the thing I believe I ended up railing against these guys for most of the previous episode on, because they appear to want philosophical exclusivity. They want all of one and none of the other. Whereas I'm sitting here going, a three-dimensionally complex universe should have people from multiple different philosophical perspectives because pluralism. But, that's again just me wanting it to be a decent representative of all of these different philosophies. Like for example, if they were writing a question comic and they had the question acting like a altruist idealist like Superman, that would also be wrong on the basis that the question actually is supposed to be this sort of Ayn Randian character. And in some ways, Batman and Lex Luthor are both semi-Randian characters in their makeup as well. But the difference is, I understand that when you are reading a Superman comic, the order of the day is going to be Superman's moral and philosophical framework, which is idealism, altruism, purity, and compassion to a fault. Because that's who and what Superman is. He is the golden boy to Batman's Dark Knight, essentially. And your whole realism/nihilism bullshit can go fuck itself, both of you. Banana. Unless you have anything to add, Brainstorm.
No, not right now, because it's pretty much the same stuff we covered last time. Hello, Giant Turtle. Good to see you. I'm doing well. How are you? They are totalitarians. If we discover space aliens on the other side of the galactic cluster, one of them daydreamed wrong think sometimes. They would say trying to fund they would start trying to fund FTL engines.
Yeah, see,
I-
this is I agree with you, DT. At least in the philosophical sense. I don't think their political policies are totalitarian. I think they're probably very prudish and very TradCon adjacent, but I wouldn't go so far as to call their policies totalitarian. But philosophically, in this particular case, they are demonstrating the tendency to want all of one and none of the other, i.e., all of the pseudo-realistic nihilism of Manchester Black and the elite, and none of Superman's idealistic altruism or compassion to a fault. Because most of this video so far has been them mocking Superman for being an idealistic altruist, or even worse, saying that the writer of this comic somehow inorganically made Superman like that. And no, Superman, for at least the entirety of modern comics, I will give you, like, the first 2 or 3 years in the Golden Age when they weren't really sure which way they wanted the character to lean and everything. But pretty much since the war years, Superman has been all about idealism, altruism, and compassion to a fault. That's who and what he is. He is the incorruptible source of light that no darkness can dim, kind of.
Giant Turtle, last I checked, the Lotus Eaters is authoritarian. They would like to ensure one way or another that other people, at least in their countries and such, think like them.
Yeah, which is why I say they're totalitarian in the philosophical sense, but not necessarily in the policy sense. Authoritarian and totalitarian, I think, are different things. And yes, I realize I'm being pedantic as shit right now, but it is worthwhile to not strawman the shit out of them. Mainly because the things they say are stupid enough by themselves that we don't need to strawman them. The material they are already made from is very much worse than straw in many cases. So we should accurately reflect their beliefs so as to bitch slap their already stupid beliefs, as and when it's necessary. Banana.
Giant Turtle, they are totalitarian in that they need 100% compliance.
And if you don't comply, God only knows what their answer to you is. Hopefully, it's just get out of here. We don't want to deal with you. But I do remember an episode of the Lotus Eaters where they were saying it's not enough to prevent people from making bad choices. You have to force people to make good choices. And that was the moment where I think Dragon Turtle as well both went no, fuck off entirely. Moving on. But yeah.
I'm like, okay, I'm gonna.
It makes me like the elite more because they've pissed off the UN. So what ends up happening is the elite then send their manifesto to every PC on Earth simultaneously, and they say, we don't believe in nations, we don't believe in treaties or boundaries or classes or politics. There are good guys, namely us, and there are bad guys, namely anyone who treats anyone else like trash to further their own petty aims. You asked for us, world, now you've got us.
Okay, but here's the thing. The elite do that to other people. This is why I find it supremely ironic, and I think DT and I are on the same page here, that you of all people agree with the elite, because that we are the good guys, they are the bad guys mentality of yours only works if you actually are the good guys, not just the less bad guys. And that's the difference here. That is why, at least as the story is told, and from the Superman-ish perspective in which it is told, that is why the elite are bad. Because they think they are being the good guys when in actuality they are just managing to be the slightly less bad guys. And even then, they cause enough collateral damage and enough stupidity that that's a, up in the air arguable question as to where does the villain's villainy end and the anti-hero's collateral damage being evil begin, essentially. And again, I want to point out this. I am okay with characters like the Elite existing. There is a purpose for anti-heroes. There is a purpose for, the Tarnished Knights, the Dark Knights, the roguish tricksters and scam artists and scoundrels. There is a place for the likes of your Han Solos, your John Constantines, your Punishers, etc. But this is true under the proviso of pluralism, i.e., I am fine with anti-heroes existing insofar as they also aren't the only thing that exists, and that there are those who abide by a higher standard, whether that be a white lighting character like Superman, or even a esoteric, balance-oriented and order-oriented figure like Dr. Fate. Pluralism is the proviso that I'm going to insist on you having, and you appear to not want none of it.
All right. Okay. Giant Turtle. If they don't believe in nations, treaties, or politics, what else do they not believe in? Property, laws, principles, rights, even trampling people for the greater good?
Yes, Jonah, these fuckers. We are once again knocking some sense into morons again. We do that a lot around here, but go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just saying, hey.
Yep. But anyway, commence with more of this bullshit. Banana.
All right. Okay.
Be good or blow your house with a 50 megaton clod-seeking cluster bomb. Love us. Now, to unpack that, yes, they have an international remit, right? So they do tread on the grounds of national sovereignty, which I am against. Then they also don't have a.
Okay. Apart from that, which is just you having a policy disagreement with them, you don't seem to have a philosophical disagreement with them, and that is my issue here. And again, I am okay with this we will enforce the good approach insofar as the people doing it are actually good, insofar as they actually are your purer than driven snow, true king, etc. But that requires them to be the good guys and not simply the least bad guys. And that therein lies the difference, because the entire conceit of the Elite's philosophical approach is that there are no truly good guys except for naive altruists who are idiots. That is what the Elites are espousing, and that's why they disagree with Superman. They think that Superman is being naive and stupid for upholding a higher standard of moral purity than them. And there is exactly where they are also wrong, and where, consequently, their approach to this becomes wrong. Only those who are actually good should be allowed to enforce the good. And being the least bad guy is not the same as being a good guy. So it's a subtle philosophical difference, but it is a very, very important philosophical difference, do you see?
So it's a bunch of superpowered Vs.
Well, as Alan Moore wrote him, yes, probably. I will defend the cinematic version of V a bit because the creators of the movie actually were smart enough to oppose Bushite warmongering in the form of quote-unquote fascism with classical liberalism, as opposed to in the comics, which was anarcho-communism versus fascism. To which my and every other sane person's answer is, fuck, I don't want either of these. Fuck you. But Alan Moore was an Antifa member before Antifa was a thing, so que sera, sera.
Okay.
Oh. I think that might be just a tiny. That might very well be a bit of a be a bit of a thing against. It does seem like we might be oversimplifying V's perspective there a little bit. I can see where you got that as well, but I'm willing to at least be slightly more charitable toward V, even though his cynical Eastern European brain nonsense does get on my nerves sometimes. Then again, I don't know if he's seen this video, let alone what he would think of it if he did see it. So it is entirely possible that V would be nodding along with this. It's also entirely possible that there might be some nuance of V's perspective that we might be ignoring. And so I will leave it ambiguous for now, I think. But anyway, Banana. Unless you had a thing, brainstormer.
To be fair, I stopped in midpoint, so.
Yep, so Banana.
Yeah.
A necessarily concrete understanding of what justice consists of. They don't articulate it as
they just say me good, ye bad.
Exactly. Yeah. And so they don't establish prudent principles, but in action, what we're shown that they do in the comic is very different from what they say and what Superman says about them. Because they not only stop the giant monstrous gorilla, but immediately after Superman hears about this,
No, actually, you are filling in gaps that you yourself are making here. What they do is perfectly accordant with what they claim to believe and what Superman says about them. You just don't like the natural, organic consequences of your own bullshit being shown to you. It's this anti-pluralistic thing mixed with quote-unquote realism, which, as with so many cases, is just softcore nihilism at the end of the day. And again, it's a refusal to tell the difference between being the good guy, which is the Superman position, and being the least bad guy, which is the anti-hero position more generally, and the elite's perspective in particular. And again, I personally am more anti-heroic, and sometimes I even tread into the category of anti-villain, probably, than Superman ever is. But here's the difference between you and me. I do not subscribe to Superman's worldview, but I can see the virtue of there being people who do and are. And moreover, even though I can occasionally be more cynical, like a Lex Luthor, or like the Elite, or like your average anti-hero, the difference is I want to be wrong. I want to one day be proven wrong. I want there to be those who are truly worthy to wield power. I want there to be the true king in the Arthurian mold, etc. You guys don't seem to want there to be any Supermen out there. You don't want there to be any King Arthurs or any Galahads. You want everyone to be quote-unquote realism TM, which, when you get right down to it, is just nihilism and the refusal to believe in the highest possible standard of good. it's funny that I, again, very much anti-villainous or anti-heroic person, can look at this and see where you guys went wrong, but you cannot. And funnily enough, I just remembered this. Funnily enough, this is actually a thing for quite a lot of the anti-hero characters that you seem to be repping here, too. Like, for example, Frank Castle, the Punisher, in Marvel, is a massive, massive Captain America fanboy. Even though Frank is definitely in the I'm gonna get my hands dirty and be a person who fights darkness with darkness person, and Steve is the cinnamon roll to end all cinnamon rolls for Marvel. He does for Marvel what Superman generally does for DC. Banana.
Okay, Giant Turtle. You know, Arch recently made a video on how the right needs to be able to claim stuff, not just destroy if it even vaguely smells left. Wonder if these guys are doing that here, trying to claim it as their own in a way.
I don't think so, because the premise of this video is explicitly calling out Superman 725 or whatever the frick the number is for being stupid and propagandistic, and by proxy also mocking the ethos of Superman by also claiming that that doesn't organically belong to Superman, which is silly. Moving on. Banana.
Okay.
He flies over to Japan, where a bunch of what they call the samurai roshi, these ridiculous-looking nuclear-powered isolationist in Japan terrorists try to blow up Tokyo.
I mean, well, yeah, they're supposed to be isolationists as though they're some kind of insurgent offshoot group, but most of Japan is very isolated.
Also,
this is utterly immaterial to anything regarding this comic, so I will not comment on it, although I will make a minor comment on the fact that you think comic booky shit in a comic book is ridiculous, ? Like,
Well, I think we also...
the way he described the nuclear-powered samurai thing and was very derisive about it. That tells me that you don't just hate moral qualities of comic books, as in the idealistic Superman thing, but you also seem to have a hatred for comic bookiness as an aesthetic or as a form of art, full stop, at least on some level, which gives lie to this whole thing you're doing in this Comics Corner segment, because a genuine comic book fan rolls with the comic booky shit because we love it, because we want more of it, because it is something that we enjoy about the media we consume, etc. We don't derisively tut-tut about it for reasons. Moving on. Banana.
Alright, trying to visualize that video. Okay. Why couldn't it have been set in the real world? We already have to make it fiction. Instead of me just writing a political essay, I can't make it about a self-insert of me IRL as well.
Yeah, this is very much... This whole thing they've done here rings very much of the same kind of neo-Hegelian, everything must be political, everything is about my themes, art can't be valuable on its own sake or in its own terms, and fuck in-universe logic, fuck character, fuck alternate perspectives, effectively. Seems to be... I'm not saying they're going that way, I'm not saying they're going the full way there, but follow their prescriptions here to their logical conclusion, then you start getting to the everything is literally political TM category. And no, like any good nerd, the things I prioritize first and foremost are in-universe logic in-universe philosophizing and things like character and world-building consistency. Motherfuckers, do you speak it?
All right. Well, also, again, I think we also, I know they're not going to, but to take into actual consideration, given the world, and this is the thing I wish a lot more comics actually think about. Although I do think like certain, like, ironically, manga or superhero, like Japan, they've done like superhero stuff like, My Hero Academia, Tiger and Bunny, is that the culture society does kind of relatively change when there's introduction of the extraordinary.
This is also something that we personally have dealt with in our comic book universe we're working on called The Lionhearted. It was like one of the foundational premises we wanted to play with regards to The Lionhearted. Was what if things were allowed to influence things and so on organically.
What I'm getting at is the nuclear-powered samurai that are also isolationist terrorists, I believe is what they were saying.
Yeah.
Fuck, was it? Right. Maybe because again, since there are so many supervillains, so many superheroes, like people in the costumes and the capes and stuff, maybe the only way to get your voice heard is to do something like that, is to kind of join that scene.
Not to mention, and thank you for jogging this part of my brain, because I didn't think of this until just now, the more comic book characters there are in a given universe, the more likely it is that there will be more. They address this kind of in Captain America Civil War, when Vision is talking about ever since Mr. Stark revealed himself, the number of superhuman casualties and so on have increased by a factor of, I don't know what the number actually was, but you guys probably know the scene I'm referencing if you're familiar with Captain America Civil War. I.e., once there start to be metahumans, it essentially becomes kind of a race to the top of what can I do to give myself a metahuman edge, whether it be magic, whether it be technology, whether it be mutation, whether it be science experiments, etc., ad nauseum. Now, you all know what my answer is. My answer is magic, but you see what I'm getting at. Once you live in a world where, for lack of a better word, these larger than life godlings are relatively commonplace. After a certain point, if you have any talent, skill, or like personal genius worth its salt, you're probably going to find a way to get in on the ground floor of one or more of these fields, just for the sake of better to be a small fish in this large pond rather than a minnow in this large pond, so to speak.
Japan also does have a long and complicated history of nuclear power, and it is a potent power source. So nuclear samurai make perfect sense. Presumably some power armor or Metal Gear Rising style.
Yes, you are correctly describing what the gimmick is here. Power armor type thing.
Sorry. Actually, fun fact, Giant Journal. I recently just bought the anniversary edition of the Metal Gear Solid trilogy, like the first 3 games.
Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, all we really need to make this particular point is Gojira ? I mean, ever since those two big bangs that Japan had to deal with, they've had kind of a chip on their shoulder vis-a-vis nuclear power. And given how much the Japanese idolize and lionize their medieval warrior aesthetic, i.e. the samurai, a samurai going nuclear is probably the single most Japanese thing to ever Japanese. Anyway, moving on. Banana.
Yeah. Let me just get to the tab.
Banana.
Banana.
What isolationist terrorist gets their country to be more isolationist by blowing up the capital of your country?
Tell me the multi-ethnic makeup of Japan.
Okay,
please.
stop.
Yeah.
Stop. I actually have an answer to this, and thus I must bitch slap them for being idiots. The reason why a isolationist Japanese person might bomb Tokyo is because Tokyo wasn't always Tokyo. Tokyo is what Tokyo became when it was westernized, when there was colonialism, etc. They probably, if I were a Japanese person with isolationist tendencies in a superhero universe, I could very easily see my argument being Tokyo must be destroyed so that we can revive Edo, which was what Tokyo was originally. So there is the very concrete and succinct answer to your question, sir. They're probably blowing up Tokyo because they don't want Tokyo to be Tokyo anymore. They probably want it to return to its Edo days. Because hyper-traditionalism is very common among these sorts of isolationists, which you both should know, considering that you are English versions of that very same clusterfuck ideology. So there. Banana.
I'm just looking at the intro's comments here. They're talking about like it doesn't make sense, but nuclear power armor and a very nationalistic group stylizing it culturally. These guys also complain about the Gothic style of 40K, how a lot of it is Space Crusade plus World War One. You can see their thinking coming into it. Where is the multi-ethnicity of Japan? You know, I don't. That's actually a fair point, Dragon Turtle. Like, do they not realize that there are groups, like just groups overall in various like countries, regardless of ethnicity? Do they not know how terrorism actually works? Because it doesn't always have to do with that shit.
Yeah, I think they just are. In this particular case, I'm thinking they're just brainlets, because it took me literally all of 5 seconds as soon as they mentioned why would a isolationist Japanese person want to blow up Tokyo to remember, oh, the transition from pre-colonial Edo to what is now Tokyo. Duh. A hyper-traditionalist Japanese faction would want to bomb Tokyo because Tokyo is a symbol, or would be a symbol, of Japanese westernization, which a isolationist faction within Japan probably wouldn't like all that much. Literally took me, within the space of the time they asked it, and the time I opened my mouth to respond to it, I had thought of all of this. So it's really not that hard. That's not me flexing that I'm intelligent. That's me saying this is really obvious and stupid. If you thought about it for more than 5 seconds, you would know.
Okay. Not to mention, most complaints are more about tourists and foreign ideology/influence. They may or may not be brainlets, but they are projecting their point a leftist and saying, how does this affect my agenda, and being lazy with it, or just dismissive since it isn't about England.
Yeah. Either they are being intentionally stupid because my ideology, or they are just brainlets who couldn't think of the obvious correct answer that they were looking for within the space. And again, while I do enjoy having pulled that out of my ass in like 5 seconds, it's not because I'm intelligent. It's because I am moderately intelligent, and I know just enough about Japanese history to know that Edo was a thing. That's all that really is required to answer that question in relatively succinct in-universe logic. You know that Edo exists, and that therefore Tokyo is a symbol of like the westernization of Japan, and then you project what a isolationist traditionalist faction within Japan in this sort of setting would think. And the answer is they want to level Tokyo to replace it with Neo Edo. Duh. Moving on.
Yeah. All right, come on. There we go.
Particularly in the
So
ethnic department.
Superman gets immediately knocked on, and the elite arrive and the threat by killing them all because they say, well, either we killed them or you'd have another Hiroshima on your hands. And Superman genuinely asks when they bring Superman back to their base, does that mean they had to die? And Manchester Black goes, yeah, obviously. That
Let me do that thing once again where I do the obvious thing you should have done and think through this before you babble on about it. You could have taken them out of the armor. You could have disarmed them and then removed the armor and thus also the nuclear power thing. Like, and again, I don't want to flex here, but it took me all of 5 seconds. Within the time that you asked that question, I already had an answer for you because I'm capable of understanding this thing we call in-universe logic. Whereas you appear to be in the revisionist artistic mold of a Frankfurt School type at the moment, where you look for my themes and my authorial intent before you consider, is there an obvious in-universe answer to this question that I will then make myself look like an idiot for not grasping? Which, the answer to that question was, and usually is, yes. You did make yourself look like a bunch of idiots for not looking for the in-universe explanation of this thing before looking for a thematic or metaphorical or commentarial answer to the question. This is why your brain on art school will always lead to this kind of bullshit, because art schools teach people to think in thematic, abstract, moral terms or political terms, rather than ever thinking in universe terms. And it will always make people seem stupid, because it always is stupid to hyper-prioritize themes and politics and morals over, does this make any fucking sense in story? Moving on.
All right.
or watch a live rerun of Hiroshima, only with blokes who can turn your guts inside out with their eyes. Rather, I'm sure it's probably.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, so then Superman, being a shitlib, invokes Godwin's law and starts screaming at Manchester Black that he's a Nazi. He says, ends justify the means. Clever, what's next? Wir branchen Lebensraum? I want you to stop. You're getting people killed. I don't care if they're terrorists or armed rebels. It's not right. This has to stop. You're murdering people and calling yourself heroes. This is not the way the job gets done.
The neoliberal mind.
Shut the
fuck up. For the love of fuck, my guys. The point wasn't Magodwin. The point was the end's relationship to the means. That's why he first opens with the ends justify the means ? Because that is the issue here. That is the philosophical issue at play here. That is the main difference between somebody like Manchester Black, who is the leader of the elite and therefore would most likely be my proxy for them, and a Superman-like character. Superman is the incorruptible source of purity and light and compassion and altruism and idealism. Manchester Black is so hog-fucked by my pragmatism that he doesn't even see the utility of the ideal anymore. And that is why he's a moron. And again, I am not saying that Superman is always right or that the idealist is always right, for I am not the idealist. I am much more in the morally gray, especially kind of dark gray area myself. But as I've said many, many times now, the difference between you and me is I wish I was wrong. I want to be wrong. I want there to be someone worthy of wielding power without letting it corrupt them, or rather, someone who was immune to the vicissitudes of darkness. It's difficult for me to believe in that because the world is occasionally a shitty place, but it is still worthwhile to hope that someday someone will prove me wrong. That's the difference between me and Lex Luthor. In fact, that's also the difference between Batman and Lex Luthor. Both Batman and Lex Luthor are kind of Ayn Randian superheroes, or super beings, rather. The difference is Batman respects and admires Superman's purity and innocence and goodness most of the time, and Lex Luthor sees it as an affront to his philosophical worldview that he needs to smash. And I don't mean to be a dick about this, but you guys do realize that you are literally siding with every version of Lex Luthor that's been written in the last 40 years, right? Banana.
All right.
mind cannot comprehend anything bad outside of the paradigm of it being Nazis.
Well, it's exactly like when Wonder Woman, well, no, Superman called Wonder Woman a fascist in Kingdom Come, and then Mark Waid depicts Orion as a fascist, even though he's a pretty benevolent hereditary monarchist in Kingdom Come. It's like, not everything you like is fascist. Not everything you don't like is
American
fascism.
perspective. If there is one person...
Okay, but that question, do the ends justify the means, would have been just as applicable if he had said, what's next, throwing people into gulags, which would have gotten your approval because it demonizes communism. Which, by the way, I'm on your side with, by the way. Fuck communism entirely. Fuck Nazism too, because they're both moronic ideologies which ruin everything they touch. But either way, pick your favorite ridiculous totalitarian, and the oceans of blood in which they inevitably end up swimming, and the question remains the same. Ends, means. Do they justify each other? Question mark. But you are completely fucking ignoring the actual substantive point that is being made here, both in and out of universe, because, oh, he said everything that he didn't like is fascist, and therefore we get to demonize them. No. The question still remains. Ends, means. What is the correlation between the two? Fucking hell. Banana.
Person nominally in charge, then it's fascism, even though there's plenty of other systems that have operated with one person taking the sovereign position.
The hilarious thing as well is my dad died fighting Hitler. So, and then my mom died of brain cancer, so that was totally arbitrary. So my dad was a hero, and my mom was unjustly taken.
Yeah, didn't he say that his dad died in a...
For the love of fuck, that is exactly the point, you morons. Pick your favorite totalitarian moron who destroys everything they touch, and the question will inevitably remain the same. What is, if any, the relationship between end and means? And if there is any situation where the ends could or would justify the means, where is the line between does justify the means and doesn't justify the means? You can have a fucking nuanced conversation about the question of ends and means. It doesn't have to be all of one and none of the other. But you are completely ignoring the entire question of ends and means because he said fascist bad and therefore derp. For some fucking reason. Mind you, by the way, I will remind everybody that the golden age of superheroes occurred in and around the Second World War. So if any group of characters has a reason to occasionally call back to my Nazis, it should be the DC heroes. Because unlike Marvel, which mostly wasn't really established until after the Second World War, i.e., the Silver Age, DC were the fictional frontliners for the war years. Moving on.
All right.
A camp. So you could take.
I don't think he said a camp. He did say he died fighting the Axis powers.
I'm pretty sure it's implied that his dad might have been a victim of the Holocaust.
We'll throw it up on the screen.
Yeah, you can decide for yourself.
Yeah, and so he says, superheroes are good for pounding the snot out of evil in bright tights, no questions, no grey areas. You, Superman, were a perfect bloody dream for a boy who lost his mother to lung cancer and a father to Adolf. And then I woke up. Moss?
No, that's not what he. No, his dad wasn't a war hero. The motherfucker was if I remember correctly, I think it was implied that his dad fell in with, BNN.
Yeah, but more to the point. What's being espoused here is that the idealism and compassion and altruism of a character like Superman is an inherently childish thing that people inevitably must grow out of. I don't believe that. Sometimes it can be a affectation of naivete, but it can also be an affectation of sincerely considered principle, and sometimes you get to a different perspective by growing out of a more simplistic one, but also just as often, or just as likely in most cases, and in fact quite more likely in a lot of cases, sometimes you grow out of things because you just grow out of them, but sometimes you don't grow out of them, you just sell out. You break. You have your Joker-style one bad day, and therefore you can no longer sustain the principles that you previously held. I'm not saying that no one has ever grown out of idealism and into more nuanced cynicism, but you must also acknowledge that almost as often as that happens, the other thing happens, where someone simply can't sustain their idealism anymore, and they break, and they sell out, and they grow up TM in the cynical way of growing up to be a cubicle slave and drudge for the rest of their lives. There is nuance here that you are ignoring, and one of those nuances is not everyone who claims to have grown out of idealism actually does. Some people just break and sell out because they don't have the fortitude to maintain their fucking principles. Like the elite, for example. Banana.
All right. Let me. Okay. All right. During trial, they'd consider an ideological hostage situation, and unlike what I suspect would be their actual take on hostage situations, they would consider that difficult. Their whole one man having control of everything is a new thing. By that logic, neither is sternly high morality rates, but you don't see them arguing for Ludditism.
Because they like being cynical little edgelords, because they think that makes them grown up instead of just making them sellouts. And in this particular case, I know which it is, because both myself and Dragon Turtle were here back in the days when Sargon of Akkad, aka Carl Benjamin, the guy who runs Lotus Eaters and the main founder of Lotus Eaters, used to consider himself a Gen X, irreverent in the face of authority person and a classical liberal. But instead of sticking by his principles and actually being willing to claw back the territory that the left stole from them, he sold out and became a tradcon by way of dadism. And so now, people who he works with and who he has either influenced along his cynical route or has actually made his cynicism even worse because they're radicalized early 20-somethings. Now these guys are going to rep the idea that you should sell out of principled classical liberalism and become a morally gray authoritarian tradcon or some shit.
Okay, hold on. Actually, I think they would treat, as Iron Druid puts it, Iron Age morality as just enlightening real politiki? No.
Realpolitik is the word you're looking for.
Which the smart people view things through.
Yeah, it's anyway. Let's continue because I would like to at least take a stab at the other video we had planned for tonight. So, Banana.
Mm-hmm.
Masks are for hiding, capes are for play. Villains don't share their passions before they smoke you, except in campaign speeches, or the pulpit, or in front of the classroom. Reality is a mite bloodier than sitcoms or comics. The greys stretch out farther. We're human beings with the power to make a difference, doing what any normal person would given the chance. We're scraping the earth free of scum, and they love us for it. Other than that final line, that could have actually been a Superman speech. Because that would have been very sensible to say.
No, it could not. Because Superman represents the light that cannot be corrupted by the darkness. That is who Superman is. Idealism, altruism, compassion to a fault. Very strong sympathies for pacifism, even if it's somewhat negotiable. Etc., ad nauseum. That is who Superman has been since during the war years and for basically all of his tenure after the war years. This isn't some revisionist history bullshit of the author trying to make Superman an idealist when he's not one. It's you refusing to acknowledge that Superman has and is always been an idealist. The anti-Ayn Rand approach. And again, the Ayn Rand approach has its uses. Characters who rep the Ayn Randian position can be found in characters like The Question in particular, and even sometimes Batman. But not everyone comes to things from the same philosophical worldview. I can allow multiple perspectives to exist because I'm a pluralist. I don't think there is much utility in there being a single one, quote-unquote, correct answer. I think there is a reason why public discussion of and public repping of multiple perspectives is, one, useful, but also proper, rational, and necessary, even if it's not always useful. But you guys are the ones saying that the elite have the correct answer and that Superman, as he is presented here, has no correct answer. Which you are fundamentally wrong about. And this pragmatism of yours, this realism TM of yours, will ultimately lead to gulags, camps, and public executions aplenty. And I'm not saying there's not even any utility for those, but having all of those and none of the principled idealist stance will ultimately lead to a very, very dark and most likely Orwellian place at the end of the road that you are wanting this comic to march down. That's why that while I am not a good person and never claim to be, I admire those who are morally better than myself in most cases, even if I happen to disagree with them at the same time. Moving on. Banana.
Alright. Okay. Let me just hit the tab.
Actually been a Superman speech. Because that would have been very sensible to say, yes, the world is more complicated than you think. Unfortunately, there are people who are unavailable to be convinced or rehabilitated that will do us harm, and I have to exist to continually take care of the problem. And even though Superman isn't providing a permanent solution like Manchester Black is, it's the same principle. It's not just that, oh yeah, that the world will be sunshine.
No, it's you wanting Superman to be a cynical pragmatist when he is not. He is not that. Batman is the one who uses darkness to fight darkness. Dr. Fate is the one who is interested in order regardless of goodness or evil. But Superman is goodness incarnate. He is the bright shining light that the darkness can never diminish. He is compassion. He is altruism. He is idealism, basically made flesh. And you can't deal with the fact that you apparently thought Superman was a much sterner character, and you want him to. You basically want to roll back everything Superman has ever done until the very earliest years of the Golden Age, when he was a little bit more of a bully and a little bit more of a bombastic character. But there's a reason why Superman grew to fill the niche that he grows to fill. Because with a character as powerful as Superman, if he decided to become a pragmatist, if he decided to be cynical and provide the final solution, as you put it, he would be a totalitarian nightmare. The only reason he wouldn't be a fascist in like the actual traditional sense of fascism is because with a character as powerful as Superman, you have no need for a state. But you have every philosophical aspect of fascism within the person of a young Justice Superman or an Omni-Man or a Homelander. And that appears to be your cross to bear here. You don't like that there's as much difference between Superman and Omni-Man, Injustice Superman, or Homelander as there is and must be for that character to make sense. Moving on. Banana.
And rainbows if we just kick back and send in a social worker to take care of the problem. So then Superman goes and talks to Pa Kent because he's feeling very insecure. And Pa Kent reassures him with some folks, mostly loud and angry ones, others just scared, thinking that Superman can't beat the elite or is obsolete. They look outside and see revolving doors on prisons, government corruption, maniacs hiding in the desert, children. Well, what happens to children these days gets anyone's blood up. Sometimes truth, justice, and the American way just doesn't make them feel any better. They want answers, easy, quick results.
I think we should also point out that
Yes, DT, I could give an entire college lecture on the utter fucktardedness that is the Dr. Fate retcons and the various decisions that have ruined that character. But point being is I was trying to give more than just one example of how characters can be different from Superman, and because I'm me, Dr. Fate and his position of order regardless of good and evil was the easiest thing I could pull at the last second. Because again, I'm me. It is what I do. I am the magic guy in any hypothetical universe. So be it. Anyway, Banana.
Yeah. I don't really have anything to say, to be honest.
Yeah, they continue to think that Superman is wrong for holding to a higher standard, forgetting that if he doesn't hold to that higher standard, and what's more, a standard of minimal involvement, basically, as well. I remember this happened when John Kent Superboy became a thing in his teenage years, where the writers had him sympathizing with like Antifa and Extinction Rebellion and stuff. In that comic, John Kent, as a proxy for the writers, basically called out Clark for his light touch and his refusal to get involved in politics. And even in that comic, where the writers were definitely on John's side, or what they made John into's side, the Antifa sympathetic Superman. Even in that storyline, I think Clark said something along the lines of, I have to approach things with a light touch because if I don't, things will break. And that's both true in the very literal sense of Superman existing in a world full of cardboard, but also in the political sense. If he went the full character from Plato's Thrasymachus, if Superman went the full Thrasymachus approach of what I say goes and I am the moral arbiter because I'm more powerful and stronger than everyone, there is very little he could do to stop himself from becoming a totalitarian monster like he is in Injustice, or a narcissistic toddler in the body of a man like Homelander is. And that's why it is not just philosophically appealing, but also fundamentally necessary that Superman keeps a light touch both in the very literal sense and in the very abstract one. Because he doesn't consider it his place to become the arbiter of what is good and bad. And we should all be very grateful that he doesn't, because if he did, the world would be a very, very dark place. Moving on. But anyway.
Alright, sorry.
This weird framing of the American way as some kind of semi-pacifist mentality where you don't kill anybody.
Yeah.
Once again, the Second Amendment is a thing that exists. Defending yourself using lethal force is
As
part
American
of
as
the
it
American
gets.
way.
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
One, you guys are British, so you really have no idea of or concept of American idealism or culture or the ideology of America, really.
This is
study it,
true.
You
as
can
well, but
study it, you can hear about it, you can do whatever, but if you don't live here, you haven't grown up in this culture, you don't have a fucking inkling of how it actually works.
There's that. Yes.
But with the American dream, that is... Do you know what the American dream actually is? What it's meant to be? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as is declared in the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah. Life being one of those very particular things that's listed there, i.e., don't fucking go around killing everybody, you cunts.
Right. Again, the Second Amendment, which, Dawn, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, I wasn't that great. I did not pay attention much in social studies. To be fair, they never made it interesting.
American educational system for the L once again, ladies and gentlemen.
The Second Amendment was created because, well, most of the time, most governments, especially at the time, did not allow you to carry weapons just as a rule, as a way of controlling the people, right?
Right.
And because the founders of America, regardless of any controversies or issues that they arose, regardless of that, because I know there were problems, ultimately the idea of America, and again, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. This is my own personal belief of it. Was that its ultimate idea was to be founded upon that people should not be afraid of their governments.
Governments should be afraid of their people. Yes.
Obviously, I'm not going so far as like V for Vendetta, but more so that the people should hold.
In principle, those within a representative government must remember their obligations to those they are representing, which is, yes, a sort of redux of noblesse oblige when you get right down to it. But forcing the government to remember that they work for the people do not work for them. But even so, and I don't mean to cut you off. Did you have anything else to?
No, I just find it really stupid that these guys are trying to comment on American culture or society or the belief structure of America without actually being from here and being from the people that we want and annexed ourselves from.
There's that. But more, I think, to the point here. One, the right to defend yourself with lethal force, if and when it is necessary, is the key words there. And two, we're dealing with beings that have a much wider degree of choices with the powers they wield than the average person does with a gun. Yes, guns have many uses, but most of those uses boil down to they are trying to kill a thing. Whether it's an animal, whether it's a person, doesn't really matter. Meaning that guns are a relatively narrow modus operandi. They are good if you need to kill and or severely injure something in relative immediacy. But Superman, and superheroes more generally, have a broader series of options as to what they can do with their powers, because we're dealing with superhuman powers at play here. And again, this goes back to what I was saying before with if Superman thought like you guys are thinking, or like Lex Luthor often does, he would be a terrible, terrible, demonic quasi-god. If Superman thought the way you guys think, it would be very dark for humanity at large, because I will remind the people on this fucking panel that physically, to a being like Superman, the average human being is less than an ant, physically speaking. Obviously, his regard for us is much more than that, which goes back to his idealism, his altruism, his desire to be a beacon of light and goodness. If he ever decided that was naive of him, though, it becomes very obvious that we are ants compared to him. And speaking as someone who doesn't particularly fancy getting squished like a bug, it is very, very good for us that Superman remains the humble to a fault source of light and good that he is. And this has been Lex Luthor's sort of appeal to Superman at every philosophical juncture they disagree at, which is Lex, much like you guys seem to, do want Superman to go full, we are basically ants compared to you, why don't you treat us like that? And always the answer is because Clark is humble enough and pure and idealistic enough to think that just because he has the power to doesn't mean he should, and doesn't mean that people in general don't matter as much as he does. That's always the line of argument Lex does to Superman whenever he's trying to understand the way Superman thinks and he doesn't understand it. Because in Lex's mind, I am better than everyone, and therefore I should treat those inferior to me like meaningless bugs. Whereas Clark is fully aware that he has the power to shatter the whole planet like it's a freaking egg to be cracked, but he has neither the moral... He doesn't allow himself the moral freedom to, nor does he have any desire to. And we should all be very lucky, and we should all count ourselves very lucky that he doesn't, because if the day that Lex manages to get through to him finally, and get him to see things in a more Thrasymachian, power-oriented sort of way, we're all fucked. Because then we're a species of ants to be stepped on, and nothing more. Moving on.
All right.
And the idea, I think, is again this liberal institutionalism that you saw coming out the 1990s of America has the mandate to spread liberal democracy via the Golden Arches theory to every illiberal place around the world till we all hold hands and sing Kumbaya in the end of American Empire. And that
Superman
affects
isn't
this book.
an
Superman is meant to
institution,
be
he
the
is an
progenitor of
individual.
values globally to see that America can be a bastion of democracy via peace and cooperation. Not that there's any force involved, not in proactively implementing a
Superman is not a government stooge. Superman is not an institutionalist. He is not spreading liberal democracy. He is simply doing what he thinks as an individual to be the best he can do while in the moral sense of rightness and goodness. That's where you're again, you're brain rotted by the very same everything is political mantra that the SJWs always use. You want Superman to think like a politician or a soldier instead of a extrajudicial good Samaritan or vigilante, which he kind of is. That therein lies the other part of the problem. You're also treating the elite as if they are soldiers who are operating by government mandate, and they're not that either. They are an edgelord mob, very much similar to the likes of Antifa. But you like these edgelord mob, or you like this edgelord mob because they philosophically more align with you, but you wouldn't like, for example, Alan Moore's V from V for Vendetta if we're going by the comics. Because again, I want to stress, the movie V is very different and better than the comic V. The comic V is Alan Moore's ostensible self-insert because Alan Moore was an anarcho-communist before it was cool. Which explains why he's such a fucking dangerous moron. But that's neither here nor there.
Moving on, or
Yep, banana. Sorry, I was reading stuff that Dragon Turtle said.
right? Okay, Don. I think you missed something there. Superman is fundamentally good as a person. I think if you're keeping him in a character, at most, he'd be a benevolent but heavy-handed dictator or a judgmental god watching you for sin.
Yeah, the best case scenario might be if he essentially became the way Doctor Doom is for Latveria vis-a-vis the Earth. But even that would frequently result in anyone who displeased him or sinned, as you put it, getting squashed. If not considerably worse, because to put it in human terms, while we might be disturbed by the type of kid who burns ants with a magnifying glass or rips the wings off of flies, we also don't really think so much of it from a moral sense that we try to convince them to stop. And if Lex Luthor got to Superman in this way, there's not really much in terms of moral consideration that would stop him from being that kid with the magnifying glass or the kid who rips wings off of flies, much less, and this is another area where I'm sitting here going Lex, you're a moron, because the second Clark agrees with Lex, he is the first bug to be squashed. Basically, same thing with the Joker. Although to his credit, I think the Joker understands this. He tries to break Batman full in the knowledge that he will be the first casualty of this crusade if he wins. But the Joker is much more okay with that. I don't think that Lex is actually all that okay with it. I think Lex is just so egotistical he doesn't spot the irony. The second he convinces Superman to treat us all like bugs, he's the first bug that's going to be squashed. And I didn't bring up the benevolent dictator point earlier, DT, because I'm looking at this kind of from Lex's point of view, and Lex won't be satisfied until Clark is totally convinced. So even if Supes decided to be the benevolent dictator, I think Lex would still be arguing, assuming he was still alive, that Superman should go even further. It's not enough to have Superman admit that he is wrong. Lex also wants him to admit that he was right all along, which would result in a more Young Justice or Homelander scenario than a benevolent dictator Doom scenario. Moving on.
Doesn't want Superman to change his mind and when.
Yeah, he doesn't want Superman to remain good, because the whole point of Lex. And to his credit, this is the one thing that Zack Snyder got right about Lex Luthor. Lex doesn't believe that someone can be nearly all-powerful and also good. So any version of Superman that contradicts that is still one that Lex is going to try to convince to take up the full might makes right. Ayn Randian, those with power have the Nietzschean duty to define what morality is position. And the second Superman is convinced of that, Lex is the first bug to be squashed. Which is why I often laugh whenever I read Lex Luthor's dialogue, because it's like, Lex, you moron. If the dangerous child god wants to be a good guy, you let him be a good guy. Because the second he decides to no longer be a good guy, we're all fucked, you in particular. Moving on.
Making the world safe for democracy, as Wilson and later Bush would go on and say, as you saw with 9/11, but rather responding to threats proportionately and permanently eliminating world-ending threats like Japanese nuclear terrorists or a giant gorilla.
Listen, if you want to present me with a story that shows Superman's virtues in his best light, where he doesn't have to kill anybody to save the day, show me All-Star Superman way.
Stop. Okay. I will demonstrate this again with the two examples you listed, because you're being morons, and I can't believe you don't see how thoroughly you're being morons. But the giant gorilla, also known as Titano, I think, is a innocent to like a benevolent to indifferent character, morally speaking, because it's an animal. And it's an animal that Superman has in the past been able to reason with. And the guys in the souped up nuclear samurai armor can literally be taken out of the nuclear samurai armor and therefore no longer be a threat. Like the fact that you just snap immediately into the elite is 100% right and Superman is 100% wrong, and there is no way in which Superman can argue for his position here, means that you, if given power, would be this myopically unidirectional. And that is both scary, but also stupid. Because, again, if you got out of this pseudo-neo-Hegelian approach to art where everything must be political, moral, thematic, etc., you would realize there are actual in-universe parameters here that could be and have been exploited by better writers than either of you, apparently.
Giant Turtle, okay, if you mean permanently removing threats, what you want is to demolish other countries and either sterilize them or occupy them as tributaries. Oh, but he was able to be reasoned with in the past, but still was a problem now. Clearly, this is a revolving door problem. Superman should be being
Or,
proactive down giant animals before they are a threat.
or it's a animal who escaped from whatever the equivalent of a zoo for him is, and the correct answer is put him back in the zoo or wherever the fuck Superman takes Titano when this usually happens. Because again, you're refusing to operate by the character's own rules, and by hyperfixating on this everything is political bullshit, which is still bullshit, by the way, no matter which political side it's leaning towards, you're ignoring very obvious in-universe ways in which this can be done without harming anybody, or at least keeping the harm to a minimum. Obviously, you know, if Superman were up against the nuclear samurais there, he'd have to hurt them at least enough to take off the armor, but it would still be a very minarchist approach to delivering harm. That's why I say that while Superman's pacifism isn't 100% non-negotiable, he is one of... He's basically the equivalent of what a minarchist is to an anarchist with regards to pacifism. He would prefer as much leeway for pacifism as he possibly can get, even allowing for the fact that he can't always solve things pacifistically. Moving on. But yeah.
Alright, let me get to the tab.
He goes and saves that woman who's about to jump off the side of a building
Yes.
just because of the fact he overhears that she is in danger and about to do something stupid, and he reassures her. Show me the end of that comic book where instead of killing Lex Luthor, he instead manages to... I forget what the exact circumstances are, but I remember that he ends up bringing Lex Luthor to tears in realizing how wrong he was. So show me a story like that, because obviously All-Star
I
Superman is
believe...
outside of continuity.
Okay, hold on. Just because I know I have read the book, right?
Yeah, by all means, go ahead.
One, your summation of that whole thing is asinine. Just the way you phrase it.
Yeah, they don't... Go ahead, sorry.
Thank you. The girl, Regan, was going to jump off a building because her therapist was late because of a train issue, which I think Superman solved on his way to stop her from committing suicide, which is not a dumb thing. It is a terrible fucking tragedy, and the fact that you are saying it so dismissively is far more revealing of your thoughts on that topic.
Yeah,
Hold on.
Sorry.
Getting back to that specific scene, which shows that no matter what small problem or what problem could be deemed small compared to what Superman does on a daily fucking basis, he cares enough to do it. Because every single person in his eyes fucking matters.
Yeah, it's the literal save the cat impulse. And by the way, to Brainstormer's point about the whole suicide thing, as someone who has regularly had to deal with suicide thoughts on occasion, yeah, you can go fuck yourself. The people who think that suicide is some narcissistic desire to get out of life or get out of consequences need to spend a few minutes sometime actually feeling the way I and many other people feel when those suicidal thoughts happen, which is, and I will walk you through it because it's people. I've heard people say that suicidal people are like narcissistic and want to make everything about them, but in my case, most of the time, when those suicidal thoughts creep in, the rationale is I make everything I touch worse. I ruin the lives of everyone I've ever interacted with. So the most altruistic thing I can do is end it all so I can stop being a burden to those that I love. So yeah, you can take that suicide is just a dumb person's game or a narcissist game and go fuck yourself. Because until you have dealt with that voice saying everything you touch becomes worse because you touch it. Until you've dealt with that on and off for weeks on end, you don't get to say shit to me about how dumb or narcissistic suicide is. Go fuck yourself entirely.
I don't think they get the whatever, man. It's
No, I know they're not capable of understanding that pain. That's
No,
why I had.
that's not what I was. I'm just talking about the All-Star Superman thing because they bring it up, and I don't really think they understand the whole point of that story.
If I remember correctly, isn't that the story where Superman says something to the effect of, "If saving the world mattered to you, Luthor, you could have done it years ago"? Or is that a different comic that
No,
they borrowed that from?
That's the same one.
Okay, so I'm not. Thank you for keeping me honest because I thought that was the issue where they did that, but they but I didn't want to talk out of my ass. But that is an excellent. The ironic thing here is they are praising All-Star Superman for doing exactly what this comic is doing. Let's take that scene with Lex and apply it to the not the authority, the elite, shall we? If actually helping people was their goal, there are dozens of ways they could do it that wouldn't result in collateral damage and wouldn't result in violence and wouldn't result in bloodshed in the extreme, edgy 90s way that the elite do their thing. That's basically exactly what Superman is saying to the elite in this comic. He's just not saying it quite as succinctly as he says it to Lex in All-Star Superman. But yeah, very much the principle is the same. Superman besmirches the elite because he doesn't think they're actually out to help people or do good in the world. They just want to hurt the people who hurt them, essentially. They just want to inflict the same suffering onto criminals that criminals cause to other people. But this is the difference between an anti-hero and a Superman-like figure, a paragon. A anti-hero-like figure thinks there's nothing wrong with responding to pain with more pain. A Superman-like figure abides by a higher standard. Superman doesn't feel like the good guy unless he can lessen the pain he gives back in turn. That's why he doesn't like harming Lex, and why I think if these were real people and their writers were relatively consistent with this, I think at the end of the day, Clark desperately wishes that he could have the same relationship with Lex Luthor that he has with Batman. Because, and I pointed this out many, many times by now, but Lex Luthor and Bruce Wayne Batman are very, very similar characters. The difference is one of them respects and admires Superman as a person, and the other is irritated with Superman because they're a fly in his philosophical ointment. Lex Luthor is bothered by Superman because he operates on a framework, on a system of philosophy and morality that Lex cannot see the utility of, and yet Superman manages to win anyway, despite the fact that Lex thinks he's being stupid and naive and childish. And that bothers Lex Luthor to such a degree that he can't see how useful being friends with Superman instead of enemies could be for both of them. Batman, however, can see not only the utility, but the admirable qualities of Superman that make him worth being his best friend, and that's why Batman is Superman's best friend, and Lex Luthor is his worst enemy. And I think at the end of the day, Clark wants Luthor to wake up and realize what he did wrong, so that he can also be one of the people that Superman goes to for advice and counterbalance on occasion. And let's not act like Luthor couldn't be a equivalent to Batman if he wanted to, because especially with the Luthor power armor that he has, he could very easily be an actual hero if, as Superman put it in All-Star Superman and then again in the DC animated universe, if saving the world mattered to you, Luthor, you could have done it years ago. Moving on.
Okay. Sorry, Director. I'm trying to see. Some people fit that narcissist thing, others don't. Others, it's like Michael said, even if you're attacking yourself, you can still be self-centering yourself in an unhealthy way. In that case, is the nexus of problems, like with leftists, capital L, arguing for just about anything, the poor, animals, environment, minorities, etc. It's usually more about hating their target and using the thing they supposedly advocate for as a human shield.
Yeah.
In the case of the poor, actively despising them, and many racial activists are just white supremacists with a guilty conscience or has internalized the toxic interpretation of their race's true way of things.
Yeah, and I'm not saying there are no narcissists who have ever feigned a suicide attempt to get attention or anything like that, because that does happen. But for those of us who have actually dealt with, I'm going to be somewhat cliche and say, true suicidality. In my experience, true suicidality is not a narcissistic thing. It's a, dear God, why can't I stop being a bad influence on everything that I love thing. It's a desire to do the best or the most good for the people you love as you can. And when that voice starts rearing its ugly head and points out to you every time you failed or fucked up or ruined something or just been difficult for people to deal with, when that voice perks up, it becomes really, really hard not to think that the best thing you can do for those you love is to remove the weight of dealing with you off of them.
That's why I mentioned what Michael told Harry there.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, I was just clarifying the point. I'm not saying that there are no people with, let's be honest, cluster B personality disorders that are suicidal for attention or sympathy or blah 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 blah. There are such people. Those people are the lowest form of scum, because for those of us who have actually dealt with that dear God, I ruin everything I touch, what the fuck is wrong with me impulse. Someone faking that or doing it for sympathy just is the most disgusting thing I can conceivably imagine. Do not. as much as it makes me sound like an SJW, do not appropriate my pain and the pain of dozens of people who I've talked to who have the same thought process with regards to this. It is disgusting. And I hope that no one ever does actually have to deal. I would not wish those thoughts onto my worst enemy. But if you're going to sit there and tell me that the only reason people are suicidal is because of a form of narcissism, yeah, no, you actually probably would benefit from dealing with that you worsen everything you touch voice for an hour or two. If for no other reason than humility. Moving on. Banana.
All right. It doesn't feel like they're really saying anything now, right?
It feels like they're repeating a lot of the same shit over and over, but Banana.
So they can have a story where at
close
the end,
enough to the
Lex Luthor realizes how terrible his ways were and decides to try and reform himself a bit, or at least go back to prison quietly. Show me that. Don't show me this one single issue, which is schizo as all hell in what it's trying to say, and very clumsy at that.
I think what's
No.
You know what?
It's
No,
Go ahead.
I could kind of see that. Like I said, like it's just one issue. I think honestly, it should have been like an arc.
Yeah,
or a new series.
I believe we both said that from like basically the top. If you go back to the first episode where we were talking about this, it would have benefited from being a series. But that being said, I don't think that this issue is schizo. I think you guys just don't like what it's saying. Because what it's saying is that there needs to be room for both the elite's cynical nihilistic approach and Superman's idealism. Or at the very least, it's centering optimistic idealism in a story whose main character is an optimistic idealist. If this were a book for the elite, I could easily see there being a situation where their way of doing things was centered as more correct. But this is a Superman story, first and foremost, and in Superman's stories, Superman's morality tends to reign, because, well, it's about the character, so the character's perspective and moral framework matters in the context of telling their story. That's why I, at the very least, am advocating pluralism. There do need to be Supermen. We could all benefit from there being Superman-like characters. But there also occasionally needs to be someone who can counsel that idealist and bring up some more anti-heroic points, which is why the friendship between Batman and Superman is so fucking amazing. Because Superman, I think, knows on some level that his ideas are occasionally a little bit too simplistic, and so he made friends with Batman, who can be a positive influence on him from the more morally gray spectrum occasionally. Moving on. Banana.
Right.
what's happened is Superman has become, and you raised the spectre of Carl Schmitt earlier in the podcast, the Schmittian conception of a liberal, where he is so worried about overstepping the mark or doing the wrong thing that he can't stand for his own principles being
A liberal is a man who cannot take his own side in an argument. When asked if Christ or Barabbas, or what is
Barabbas.
Barabbas, he would say we need to adjourn a committee so that we can debate over this.
Yeah, whereas Nietzsche's...
No. There are classical liberals who can, in fact, take their own position on an argument. Because again, at the very least, I saw your comment, Dragon Turtle, and you're right. The guy who wrote this comic might be saying that Superman is quote-unquote objectively correct. But I, at the very least, remain consistent in my advocacy for pluralism here. If for no other reason than just it makes for a more accurate portrayal of the complexities of the world, and that's why I'm glad that those of us who grew up on the DC animated universe did grow up on the DC animated universe, because in particular the Cadmus storyline, where we actually got to explore the various political and philosophical approaches of the various Justice League members, is fucking gold. Like, gold standard for how you tell this kind of story correctly. Because you do have your Randian character, your the Question, and the episodes that focus on his and the Huntress's relationship are probably by far the best portrayals of the Question, full stop. But you also get the likes of Green Arrow, who, by his own description, is, quote, an old lefty. I believe the government must do for people the things that the people can't be expected to do for themselves. And you also have the, example of only individuals know how to do morality correctly in the form of Batman. And you have Amanda Waller, who is basically the moral voice of the institution. And that's why so many of their conversations work so well, is because they both are coming from a perspective of wanting to help people, but they are coming from two different ends of the spectrum, and therefore their philosophical conflicts are very fucking interesting. And by the way, while I'm harping on the good old days of the Justice League Unlimited cartoon, it stuns me that Saturday morning cartoon for children is more philosophically complex and interesting than most dramas currently being written for quote-unquote adults in today's day and age. It stuns me and shames me slightly that we have become so unironically infantilized as a society that the shows written for adults can't hold a candle to the moral complexity of Justice League Unlimited, for God's sake. Moving on. Banana.
Okay.
His perspective on justice, and again, I'm no real fan of Nietzsche, but he literally said the man who is overcorrective in administering justice because he has a personal and emotive connection to the person who has aggrieved him, like Green Arrow shooting Prometheus here, is closer to the ideal of dispassionately dispensing justice and carrying out capital punishment on behalf of the community than
you can't countenance the idea that there are any substantive objections to capital punishment, can you? You can't see the use of the person who does have principles that aren't circumstantially negotiable. And yes, as a rule, the person who was aggrieved by someone shouldn't be the one to carry out their execution. That is probably going to go wrong far more often than it is to go right. Because as a general rule, the consequences that someone who's actually been wronged metes out to someone who has wronged them are almost always disproportional to the ones that someone with a bird's eye view can meaningfully approach. I.e., if you're a victim of torture, you might end up wanting to torture somebody who's tortured you. But because, those who claim to be better should actually strive to be better, we shouldn't let the person who was tortured decide how much we should punish the person who tortured them. At least not directly. There should be a third party who goes, all right, how do we balance the need for retribution with the need for actual moral betterment here? Because if you go full capital punishment, it becomes really hard not to to wind up in the general position that Caligula and Nero wind up in. Public executions are a bad precedent to get into because sooner or later, all it does is whet people's appetite for blood, and then your entire civilization is just swimming in oceans of blood. That's not a good ending. The Imperium of Man falling from the golden age of technology into the 40K civilization is not a good progression for their civilization at all. Just like the Eldar getting bored and murder fucking a chaos god of lust into existence is not a good thing for their civilization. And it is important to occasionally remind ourselves, if we want the world to be better, at some point we also have to be better. Moving on. Banana.
All right.
The man who goes, no, I can't exercise my emotions, I can't exercise will to power. If I kill the wrong person, it's terrible, and therefore retreats into himself and allows evil to exist.
My problem with that is always they use the example of, well, will it
False
stop here? What if I end
dichotomy.
up killing the wrong person? It's like, but you should be able to exercise your own judgment accurately on that. And the situations that they always find themselves in are
They're
situations
active threats.
where it
Yes,
is,
and
we
my-
know this is the right person. You'll
Stop. And my judgment at this particular moment says you both are moronic cunts. I take it, though, that you don't want me to exercise my personal judgment insofar as I can see that you are both moronic cunts. Because, as we've established here, you don't like the idea of pluralism, and you certainly don't like people actively disagreeing with you and acting accordingly. Otherwise, you wouldn't be bitching and moaning about Superman being an idealistic altruist this whole fucking time. But don't worry, because I, as a pluralist, don't want you to please face the wall now. I am perfectly willing to allow you to be moronic cunts as and when you are moronic cunts. But I will, as and when you are moronic cunts in the vicinity of my ears, take it upon myself to argue with your ass until you stop being moronic cunts. Do you see how that works? And do you see how that's a far more humane answer to the question than that's amusing, please face the wall now? Click, click. Moving on. Banana.
have like a supervillain literally just murder someone in front of their hero, and he goes, but what if I go too far next time?
This is why the Man of Steel next snap was absolutely justified. Even if you
Oh
don't
my-
like the film, you can cry about it. Superman was completely vindicated in snapping Zod's neck.
No. He literally could have just put his hands over Zod's eyes, and Superman's Kryptonian flesh, by virtue of being, Kryptonian, wouldn't have been nearly as damaged, if at all, by Zod's heat vision. The neck snap was utter novicehood and stupidity on Superman's part, and it only exists, and this is confirmed by Zack fucking Snyder, it only exists because Zack Snyder, being a Randian objectivist, thinks that no one could organically arrive at the position of idealistic altruism, so there must be a dark, personally traumatic, pragmatic reason why Superman doesn't kill. Namely, in this case, he's traumatized because he had to do it to Zod once. And every single motherfucker who has seen that movie, for the utter shit piece that it is, knows that Superman doesn't need a pragmatic reason not to kill people. He just needs fucking principles and the purer than driven snow white lighter-ism that he is, and always has been pretty much since the 40s.
Right. I do also want to point this out. The major issue, this is just me speaking as a writer with the movie of Man of Steel,
Mhm.
more or less than a Superman fan, actually. The
Mhm.
next step doesn't feel earned, built up. It feels very like last minute idea.
Yeah, no, because and here again is Zack Snyder being a moron. It's a disproportional response to what Zod is trying to do. And literally every other version of Superman could have found 5 or 6 different uses of his own powers that could have prevented Zod from lasering some people, let alone the, discount nostalgia critic point that he could have literally just flown Zod up into the air into like the upper atmosphere until Zod collapsed from lack of oxygen, or he could have knocked him out while he was lasering some people until his lasers were no longer lasering. Like there are dozens of things that would have actually taken less time for Superman to do that he could have done instead of being a traumatized little shit because Zack Snyder thinks he needs a pragmatic reason not to kill instead of a principled idealistic reason because Zack Snyder, being a Randian objectivist, doesn't understand the moral purpose of idealism or altruism, or even the moral validity of idealism or altruism. And again, I'm not an idealist or necessarily an altruist, but I admire those who strive to abide by that principle. Because I hope to one day be proven wrong.
Right. So I actually did rewrite the ending of Man of Steel a while ago. And for one thing, I added Martian Manhunter in there because I did have the guy who plays him in there set up. So I figured,
Yeah, that was
why not?
that was the original idea, and they didn't go with it for some reason.
Really?
Yeah,
It's just-
they were gonna have Martian Manhunter in there, but they decided against it in the reshoots. Which, granted that they kind of ruined it in DDS by including 5 different superhero characters, I can understand the logic. One wonders why in the fuck they didn't think of that when they were making BDS, but oh well.
Yeah, I had him kind of come in towards the latter half of the movie, kind of acts like a mentor, would act like a mentor for Superman for a while. At some of these movies, our friend, and the way I had it was he and Superman team up against Zod in the Battle for Metropolis, and in the last scene where Zod is trying to laser the family, which, by the way, I also wrote because it also didn't make sense to me that I wrote that the family were trapped by rubble.
Yeah, because there's no reason in movie, as the movie is written, for them just not to move out of the fucking way.
Yeah. But Martian Manhunter was defending them, like, taking on the brunt of the heat vision as he moved closer to Zod, as Clark was holding him in the headlock. And when MM got close to Zod, he basically gave him a psychic hit, like massive pulse to Zod's brain, basically leaving him comatose, which would have if someone wanted to bring Zod back later on, set it
Could
up
have
there.
been temporary.
Yeah. Which,
correct me if I'm wrong, but as I remember it, that's exactly what Superman does to Manchester Black in this particular comic. He temporarily he causes a minor I'm not even sure what the word is, but he causes a minor inactivity in the part of Manchester Black's brain that allows him to use his telepathy, thus disarming him without killing him. And by the way, it was temporary in the comic, so it's not even like a permanent lobotomy. It's just a I'm going to temporarily neutralize this until you learn how to not be a cunt, basically. Anyway, shall we? Well, it's 10:30ish. Should we at least try to get started on the Kingdom Come
Yeah.
video?
I already started. So this is another Lotus Seeds one. I know we love punishing ourselves.
This one though, just for clarity's sake, I think this one came before the one we just did. So if there's overlap, there's a good reason for it, and I think they even mention their take on Kingdom Come in that previous Lotus Eaters video, if I remember correctly. But without further ado, Banana.
Yeah. Well, I do want to also preface this. I still need to read Kingdom Come. I have not read it. I've seen videos talk about it and stuff, and basically read throughs.
I don't think you'll need to have like a. I don't think you'll have to have actually read the comic to see where these people go wrong, because where they go wrong is entirely contained within their own shoddy philosophical framework.
I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that. I'm just prefacing
Disclaimer.
that. Yeah, disclaimer. Although I don't know why I never grabbed it. It should have been. It would have been at the comic shop actually. I'll look for it next time I'm there. I got a lot of stuff to read through because I haven't read anything I've bought in a few months.
Yep. Banana.
Banana.
I like what they're trying to do with Superman as an inspiration. Unlike Frank Miller, Mark Waid understands what Superman should be, but the way that he writes his decision-making in this, I would say the only good decision that Clark makes in the entire comic book is when he chooses to come back in the first place. Everything else he...
As we just covered, I question whether these yahoos know what Superman is or should be, considering they seem to have a massive fucking problem with it when you get right down to it. I suspect this is going to be a yet another case of Mark Waid, to his credit, writing Superman appropriately, and these people taking issue with it as though it's a foreign intrusion into Superman's character. If I am wrong, then I will eat my fucking hat, but I suspect that's roughly where we're going to be sitting with this one as well. Superman is being written correctly, they just don't like what Superman looks like when he's being written correctly, is probably my guess. Banana.
Alright.
He does in this comic book is the opposite of what he should be doing.
He should have been, I think, injured and forced involuntarily into retirement, and then it becomes psychosomatic of where he thinks he shouldn't leave because the world has moved on from Superman. He shouldn't have imposed it himself,
Yes.
I think.
We'll get on to why he chose to in a few minutes.
Definitely.
Sure.
Because
So then what
whoever
happens is
heard of
Harlequin
someone
and-
retiring because of a crisis of faith or a philosophical point of view, no one is out. Sorry. I was just gonna sarcastically lampoon their perspective here. No one is ever truly motivated by philosophical or moral points of view. It's only ever pragmatism that leads to people making decisions. God damn it. And what kills me is these motherfuckers, these people right here, are the same sorts of people who claim that Western civilization is founded on Christian values, and yet they can't understand the notion of a moral crisis of faith. I'm not even fucking Christian, and that was the first thing that popped into my head. If I were a Christian-oriented tradcon type, this would make perfect sense from my perspective even then, because how many parables and stories of Christianity and the Abrahamic faith more generally are focused around a crisis of faith? I've read enough medieval literature to know it's a fuck ton, frankly. So the idea that they can't countenance the idea of Superman having like a crisis of faith or a midlife crisis or some sort of clash between his ideals and his material reality derp. Rage. For all of these people claiming that pragmatism is their watchword, I think this is yet another case where they're confusing pragmatism for nihilistic, quote-unquote, realism derp. Banana.
And the heir to the Mr. Terrific name start fighting these giant skeleton robots on top of a cable car. The cable car's about to collapse. A bunch of innocent people are going to fall into, I believe it's the Hudson River. And then Superman comes along, emerges out of a typhoon, and apprehends both the robots and the reckless anti-heroes. And this...
Because he sees a moral parallel between them that you appear to be either pig ignorant of or deliberately making yourselves ignorant of? Here we go again. Do you in fact know the difference between being the good guy and simply being the least bad guy? Because I fucking know the difference, and I'm usually on the second category there. I'm usually the least bad guy rather than the good guy. And yet even I can tell you that there is in fact a moral difference between being the least bad guy and being the good guy, capital G. Like, you guys appear to have brain rotted yourselves to the point that you don't understand the difference between someone being the least bad guy and someone being the actual capital G good guy. It's such a myopically childish perspective. I just can't get over it. And again, I'm speaking as someone who probably falls somewhere between anti-hero and anti-villain most of the time. What in the actual fuck? Banana.
Alright, let me just... Come on. Yep.
is actually an allusion to Revelation. So there's a verse from chapter 1. And in the midst of the lampstands I saw one like a son of man, dressed in a robe that reached down to his feet, with a golden breastplate around his chest. His head and his hair were white with the whiteness of wool, like snow, like his sideburns there, and his eyes were a burn.
Okay, this is completely immaterial to anything, but Superman's power should slow his aging. This is a well-established thing, and I get that symbolism is the reason why it's not operative in this case, but Superman's power should slow his aging, because super durability also entails that things that assist human aging don't really affect Kryptonian aging as long as they're, taking in enough yellow sun radiation and shit. So,
well, to be fair, he locked himself up in the Fortress of Solitude for a while and was
right. Okay. Never mind. But yeah, as a minor quibble, red sun or kryptonite notwithstanding, Superman should be functionally immortal, if not like de facto in the capital I immortal sense, like Wonder Woman is. Anyway, banana.
All right.
Burning flame. His feet were like burnished bronze refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. From his mouth there protruded a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face shone like the sun in all its brilliance. So obviously...
Okay, so I do have something to say about this, because obviously the title is Kingdom Come Gets the Bible Wrong, right?
Yes.
I think their point of view of this is... I could be wrong. Obviously, we're only like a minute and a half in, right? I think where their position of it is coming from is, how does this translate to the story of the Bible, right?
Yeah, I think what they're doing is they're trying to say I think what they're doing is they're trying to say that the Bible should take moral precedence over
So,
DC or in-universe logic.
Dalton. Well,
Sorry.
what I was gonna say, you could. What I was gonna say was, I think because I believe Kingdom Come is taking inspiration from the Book of Revelations, correct?
It's not the only thing it takes inspiration from, but yeah, primarily Revelation.
Well, like because the main character is a preacher, and they have the Spectre, the Spirit of Wrath, who calls upon him to witness the end of days.
Right.
So that's why I assumed Revelations took kind of a big precedent in terms of.
Yeah, it's definitely the main thing they're pulling from, but I think they do make other biblical homages too.
That's fair. That's fair. I wasn't trying to discredit that or not. I was just pointing out that specific thing. But
yeah, and I was just listing it for like accuracy's sake.
Fair enough. But what I was gonna say, what I'm saying is, not saying it's a backdrop because it does seem to be a central focal point within the story itself. I'm not saying, but it's more so a skeleton to build the story off of.
It's a framework.
Thank you. I had the word, but
it's not trying. Go ahead.
Sorry. No. Please say your thing, and then I'll say mine because.
Okay. But I think the argument they're going to try to make here is that the Bible verses they're using for like symbolism and springboard purposes should take precedence over the like in-universe logic or broader ethos of DC, which I realize I am rather harsh on anyone who tries to bring religious moral fagging into anything, and DT has frequently mentioned to me that he thinks I'm a little bit too hard on the religious side of things. But symbolism or no fucking symbolism, this is in the DC universe. So yes, the ethos of the superhero characters within it is going to take moral precedence over whatever superficial connections it makes with the Bible. And I think trying to hold a story that borrows symbolism from the Bible to a biblically moral standard is fucked. Because just because you borrow symbolism from a thing doesn't mean that you necessarily therefore must borrow the like moral ethos of a thing. And trying to literally Bible thump and get your Bible stuck into what is at the end of the day a DC comic is you bordering dangerously on theocrat fundamentalist territory, generally. Also, while we're talking about if you borrow symbolism, you must therefore also borrow the moral ethos, the Bible borrows a lot from pagan symbolism that predates it. So, just pointing that out here for in the event that that's the argument they end up going with, I can just go, well, the Bible borrows a lot from paganism, therefore should we hold them to pagan moral standards? Or more likely, it's just because most special pleading derp.
Okay, also, Drentro, Kingdom Come gets the Bible wrong. Were they going for a literal interpretation? I don't think Thor comics were reenacting Norse myth. Depends on how you look at it, but I get your point.
It also depends on the story and the writer. Sometimes they do borrow from Norse, sometimes they don't.
Right. The thing I was going to mention was I think we also have to look at the context of Kingdom Come when it came out, right? Which was late 90s, correct?
Yeah.
And which was kind of in the, I want to say, I don't know if it's technically the dark ages of comics. I know it was
certainly like the edgiest era of comics.
Right. But Kingdom Come was one of those comics that was kind of a response to that. It's a good story on its own. I'm not going to deny that. But Barl's still not trying to be accurate. Yeah, no, that's fair, Drangel. That's fair. That's fair. But it was in response to basically, well, if you look at the designs of like the newer heroes of that, of Kingdom Come, the anti-heroes, right? They're
Mhm.
very gaudy, very like overly designed, very what's the word? Edgy, right?
Yeah.
Which obviously was a response to the times, because a lot of people, and we've talked about this ad nauseum before as well, of like people kind of took the wrong things of like Alan Moore specifically, I guess, because he kind of was the
They learned the wrong lesson from the British invasion. Instead of making stories that are more three-dimensional, fleshed out, and complex, the order of the day, they went academic deconstruction with comics, and now they're trapped in a cycle where the only story the writers know how to tell half the time is, what if the character fucked up and lost all of his powers, / what if he wound up back at the beginning of his moral arc and had to re-earn everything all over again. And it must
sorry, I just also want to point out, hell, even Alan Moore around 99 to 2000 created Tom Strong as a response to the overly edgy era that he kind of helped start.
Wasn't there also Supreme, I think?
Yeah, no, that was actually before Tom Strong too, which I'm actually looking into getting from Amazon. I'm considering buying it. I'm not sure about it yet.
I'm at the same point with Promethea. I'm starting to think I should read Promethea, if for no other reason than to reverse it, because Alan Moore wrote Promethea as like a narrative spell to bring about the apocalypse. And being as I am kind of the anti-Alan Moore, I suppose it is incumbent upon me to try and weave a counterspell, narratively speaking. Lol. But that also raises the question if by reading it I would somehow be accountable to Alan Moore's approach to narrative magic and shit.
Honestly,
that's neither here nor there.
I would honestly say don't risk it.
Yeah, but in order to appropriately create a reversal spell, I suppose I'd have to understand what he did in the spell to begin with. But that's neither here nor there. Other thing I was going to say is, this is also the book that Mark Waid is the most famous for, and for those of us that cut our teeth in the venue of what was once known as Comicsgate, we know that, a couple decades notwithstanding, Mark Waid has always been an edgy boy. The only difference is he used to be an edgy boy with talent, as opposed to an edgy boy that's gone so mental that he can no longer channel his talent for the most part. But yeah, Mark Waid is also a proviso to be considered here, because Mark Waid, if the early years of what was Comicsgate are any indication, Mark Waid is a few dozen marbles shy of a full set here. It's just that he used to be talented enough that it mattered less, much like Alan Moore. And quite a lot of people within the British invasion anyway. But Banana.
Yeah, let me if you're that worried about it, you could try summoning something to ask if it's safe / help you withstand it, which would probably be Mav then.
I'm not bothering Mab with this, mostly because I don't want to freeze to death. So there. But in theory, I suppose there are ways I guess if I read a digital copy, it might mitigate it somewhat. Then again, Alan Moore is definitely in the more like Chaos Magician style of things, so he might might have rigged it so that like technomancy is still in play. I don't fucking know, but one way or the other, part of my purpose in doing what we do, and by we I mean me and Brainstormer, because we write a lot of comics.
Oh my
At
god.
least are working on a bunch of them. But point being, part of the reason I do what I do is to effectively be the anti-Alan Moore, because so much of why the world is on fire right now is because Alan Moore and his ilk demanded that it be so. And I strive to unfuck what they have fucked. Moving on. Banana.
You have the House of S logo across his chest. He's got the white sideburns, his
House of
laser
L.
eyes. He comes up out of a typhoon, which is what saves the cable car from falling, and his feet hardly ever touch the ground. So, being irradiated with the brilliance of the sun, where he gets a lot of his powers, it's easy to see how the Christ-like return of Superman can be drawn directly to the imagery of Revelation.
Okay, and this is something. I wanted
Even if you
ask you
want to
about,
pull my
because obviously
themes,
you
bullshit. And this criticism applies to both Mark Waid for doing this shit in the first place and these people for being morons. Superman is Moses. He is not Christ. End of story. Even if you want to pull my Jungian themes and archetypes and bullshit. He's a combination of Samson, Buck Rogers, or the other Flash Gordon, and Moses. There is no Christ in Superman anywhere, and there wasn't right up until the 70s movie, where they had Jor-El basically deliver a speech to Clark, like God probably would have to Christ. The whole they only lack the light to show the way, and so I have sent them you, my only son thing. But that was largely an invention of a movie. So if we're being absolutely like purist about this, Superman is Moses, Samson, Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers. Those are the influences in which I wish people would remember to play more strictly, so that we didn't get this bullshit Superman as a Christ allegory every 5 fucking minutes. And yes, I'm looking at you again, Zack Snyder, because you did that too, all through your movie. God damn it. Banana. Unless you had a thing to add.
No.
Sorry.
I'm good.
Revelation
Yeah.
for all of this in preparation. I was wondering, with a lot of the issues that I
Well, actually, okay, never mind. I did have something. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, well, again, it's taking the framework of the Book of Revelations and telling it through the lens of the DC universe.
Yeah.
So Superman, again, it's symbolic. It's not a literal interpretation. It's not. I feel like they don't understand.
It's not trying to be biblical fan fiction. It's trying to use the symbolism of the Bible as a symbolism that a lot of people are familiar with to kind of lend some gravitas towards this particular story. And quite frankly, while we're sitting here, I think, and again, I'm not saying that Kingdom Come is bad or anything, but I think it's somewhat hackneyed for Mark Waid to want to do this in the first place. By which I mean, you should strive for in-universe validation and value, and not just borrowing symbolism from other things. Or if you're going to borrow symbolism from other things, actually make use of that symbolism in-universe instead of just hitting the narrative archetypical beats derp. So this once again could be an affectation of, and again, I'm not denying that Mark Waid has talent, but it might be an affectation of Mark Waid being a little bit of a brat and a pseudo-intellectual hack. But at this point, it's two pseudo-intellectual hacks that we have here arguing with another pseudo-intellectual hack, Mark Waid. So either way, we're at least two pseudo-intellectual hacks down, and possibly three. Moving along. Banana.
I wanted to ask you about, because obviously you reread Revelation
Yeah.
for all of this in preparation. I was wondering, with a lot of the issues that I have with character decisions in this, would you say, is this pretty... let me see how I can formulate this question. Is it trying to stick...
Why would you even ask that question?
It's not a finished question though.
Okay,
So,
but let him finish the question, and then I'm going to yell at him for even needing to ask the question. Banana.
closely to what's described in Revelation, to the point where it's forcing characters into positions strictly to keep up these illusions
No.
to Revelation.
And my theory is actually that Mark Waid disregards biblical morality for his boomer institutionalism, because Revelation basically says that
what the fuck was all that?
Okay. I will give them half a point, because I thought they were going to ask how biblically accurate it was, which would have been an even stupider question. So they are asking a question that is slightly less stupid than the question I thought they were going to ask. But that's actually a fair point on some level, asking whether Mark Waid kind of forced things into position so that they could make these biblical parallels. That is actually a somewhat meaningful question to ask, because it is a worthwhile question to whether Mark Waid let these things emerge organically, or whether he was trying to force them in with a fucking sledgehammer. And I will agree with the two of these guys in saying Mark Waid probably was forcing it, because Mark Waid is a fucking hack. He used to be a hack with talent. He is no longer a hack with talent. He is just a hack. But he used to at least be a hack with talent. And I do suspect he was trying to force things to fit this mold so that he could make commentary on it. Probably. Anyway, go ahead, Brainstormer. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's pretty much what I had at that point. Yeah, no, no, I'm good. Banana.
Magog and Wonder Woman were right.
Really?
Yes.
In what sense?
There is a verse in Revelation. I think it's
Okay, actually, sorry. It's just when they, Magog and Wonder Woman are right. Again, I have not read the full book, so I don't have full context. But I kind of do agree with, like, trying to shoehorn or force the thing. But also, again, just the early thing of, like, I don't know. It's just like, it feels like they're trying too hard to be intellectual with this discussion.
They're being pseudo-intellectual by very definition, but that's neither here nor there exactly. I think to which they are referring here is that Magog and Wonder Woman try to do the, like, anti-heroic pragmatism nihilism thing, and they're going to contrast that once again with Superman being written correctly, but they just don't like it when Superman is written correctly, because they think Superman should be more of a, like, chauvinist bully than he is. Which, again, I will give it to them. He was, for, like, the publishing equivalent of 5 seconds, back in the very, very early days of the Golden Age, like prior even to the war years. He was a little bit more of a overconfident bully than he became. But there is a reason why basically everything in the war years and after the war years had Superman being a beacon of incorruptible light and innocence and purity. It's because, one, that is the kind of character that works best for a character like Superman, and two, both for philosophical and pragmatic reasons, you want Superman to have as light touch on the world as possible, because if he didn't, at best, you'd wind up in a Doctor Doom controlling Latveria state, and at worst, you'd wind up in a world where Superman treated everyone who was weaker than him, which is most beings, full stop, like bugs. Which is no bueno. And I don't know why they have such a bug up their ass about Superman being written as Superman should be written, which is an idealistic altruist who is compassionate to a fault. Banana.
21-7.
So for
gonna find it.
context, Magog is one of the leaders of the new breed of superheroes. He's got a big spiky helmet, big metal armor, as you would expect. He chose, after Joker came to Metropolis and went on a rampage that killed 93 people, he chose...
They're not finished yet, so banana.
to kill the Joker.
Yeah.
Which he did before Superman could get to him, and Superman was just going to, apprehend him. The police had already apprehended him, so there was no point in Superman even looking for him in the first place, really. The police managed to get to him before Superman or Magog. While he's in police custody, Magog just shoots him, kills him dead.
Yeah, see,
there's a public trial where...
You see, that Joker was already in custody, and then someone kills him. That feels a bit... And don't get me wrong, I'm aware of cases happening like that. But still, that just feels a bit odd, right?
Yeah. Why would you shoot him when he's already in custody? It's not as though we don't know that Arkham is sometimes a revolving door, and therefore the Joker will probably be back on the streets jokering before too long. And this goes back to a conversation me and Brainstormer have had a lot, which is, as much as people bitch and moan about how Batman should just kill the Joker, the obvious question becomes, there are so many other characters who could do this without it being a moral weight on their soul. Why don't one of them just do it? Because the Joker doesn't have, super sanity notwithstanding occasionally, the Joker doesn't have any powers that would make him a greater physical danger to a normal-ass fucking person. Like, I get that, even the police in Gotham rely on Batman for a lot of things. But what I don't get is if the majority of Gotham wants him dead, then why don't any of them fucking kill him? Hell, why don't any of his underling henchmen fucking kill him occasionally? Like, that is also on the table. And we know that the Joker basically gets whatever henchmen he can get most of the time. He doesn't have a revolving series of henchmen that he defaults to all the time. So it's not like you could really expect full loyalty from his henchmen either. So yeah, but long story short, there are philosophical and character-based reasons why Batman doesn't kill the Joker. But if anyone in Gotham wants the Joker dead, he doesn't have any physical qualities that would make him substantively more hard to kill than an average person. So as much as lynch mobs and Antifa mobs and so on are never the answer, if Gotham at large wants the Joker dead, someone else can easily do it without Batman's moral fortitude being corrupted. You'd honestly think that at some point they would tell a story where some Joe Smo does try to kill the Joker specifically to spare Batman the moral weight of the thing. Because that would be a really interesting story if some randomer in Gotham tried to kill the Joker specifically as a like favor to Batman, or as a means to like spare Batman's moral compass the anguish of having to do it. That could be a really interesting story that writers today will never tell, because writers today don't care about the in-universe logic or anything like that, because we're dealing with a whole bunch of art school cunts. Speaking of which, banana.
Alright, hello, John. It's good to see you. I know you were in here earlier. I hadn't seen your comments in a while, so. If it was for property value, then it makes more sense for it to be the case. Personally, I prefer the Batman, JLU, and BTA Joker. Also, I like Brave and the Bold Joker, too.
Brave and the Bold Joker is good, especially the song "Where's the Fun in That." That really kind of encapsulates the Joker.
Well, to be fair, I do. To be honest, the one episode I love the most from Brave and the Bold, or like the couple episodes that they made, was
the multiverse, like 3 or 4 parter.
It was just 2-parter.
Mm.
It was the Earth 3. Where Joker was Red Hood, and just, I don't know. It was cool. I liked it. It was really good. Honestly, that show had no right being that good.
Yeah, it really was. My favorite episode of that is the one where Batman meets Sherlock Holmes, and they team up to defeat the Gentleman Ghost while he was still alive and Etrigan's involved. That might be my favorite episode of that show.
All right, banana.
Yep, banana.
Magog is acquitted of murder, and newspaper front cover shows that the public overwhelmingly supported Magog's decision to do this. On this basis, Superman decided, like a complete whiny baby, that I'm not as popular as I used to be, so goes into self-imposed exile. And I understand.
Oh my!
For the love of fuck, you absolute bellends! It's because it causes him, much like in the previous comic where you didn't understand Superman, it causes him a philosophical conflict, a crisis of moral faith. Because Superman believes in holding himself and others, although admittedly he's humble enough to usually start by holding himself to the standard and then externalizing that from there, but he holds himself and others to a higher standard. And so when he sees people essentially agreeing with what's more or less a lynch mob sentiment, it fucks with his head and gives him a moral crisis of faith. And it is for this reason, not his popularity, you absolute bellends, that makes him think twice and be philosophically insecure. It's because he holds himself to the standard that everyone else raised him to, which is as a symbol of purity, innocence, justice, humility, etc. And if people are actively preferring something other than that, he feels like a failure. He feels like he did something wrong to not show people why the high road is the better road. And it is this crisis of faith that causes him to retire. For a time. You absolute bellends. Banana.
Alright. Oh no, Giancho, the Batman cartoon from 2004 is totally unfairly forgotten.
Certainly not forgotten by either one of us. I will say I prefer BTAS to that slightly, but slightly is the operative word there. I think that if it had gone on longer and gotten the chance to develop into a full-on Justice League show, it could have even eclipsed BTAS.
To be fair, I grew up on the Batman and Batman Brave and the Bold more so than I did the animated series, so I have a bit of more connection to those.
Yeah, Brainstormer is a youth.
Not that much.
4 years is apparently a very, very long time. And being friends with Brainstormer is how I learned that 4 years is actually a very, very long time. Because how drastically it shifted our points of references on stuff.
All right.
Banana.
Is trying to say that Superman is recognizing the changing of the tides, that public opinion is going against him. Perhaps his style.
The comic industry is pushing out these Golden and Silver Age heroes for the newfangled Image heroes.
Yes, I recognize the allegory that it's trying to pull. I recognize the themes that it's trying to push, but it makes Superman into a whiny baby who just leaves.
Again, for people who ostensibly claim that Western morality is rooted in Abrahamic religions, especially Christianity and Judaism, you don't seem to be very familiar with this thing called a crisis of faith. And or you don't think Superman should be allowed to have one. Which is dumb. And yes, there are meta senses in which this can be viewed, but once again, and I know I'm a broken record with regard to this, if you are so hyperfixated on my allegories, my metaphors, and my didactic context that you can't see the in-universe logic or characterization at play, then you are just as bad as the art school twats that you viscerally hate. Which, by the way, I viscerally hate too. Fuck this art school mentality of themes and authorial intent over literally fucking everything. But, that being said, you are pulling the exact same shit. You're just pulling it from somewhere in the vicinity of tradconism instead of the social justice leftism bullshit. Which, you can't use the weapons of the social justice warriors or the woke to do anything good. Again, this is I think where I disagree with the Lotus Eaters as as a premise fundamentally. You cannot use the One Ring for the benefit of the lands of elves and men. It cannot be done. It must be cast into the fire. And for the One Ring, read this post-Frankfurt School neo-Hegelian nonsense. You must stop Hegelianing, or we're just going to wind up back here in another 10 years, where you guys will have to be dethroned in turn. Because neo-Hegelianism, especially in the post-Frankfurt School variety, ruins everything it has ever touched, and is responsible both directly and indirectly, for every horrifying totalitarian regime of the 20th century. It must be cast into the fire. Destroy it, goddammit. Or I will pull an Elrond and say I was there the day that the strength of men failed. Banana.
Alright. That's fair, Jonah. BDW, this is why I don't really do many reactions to videos as well. In 10 seconds to 4 minutes, I can find around 30 minutes of content and talking points.
Yep. I mean, we do that a lot because there's a lot of stupidity crammed into a very tiny space. especially when they repeat the same mistake over and over and over again without catching what they did wrong. But banana.
All right. Yeah, there we go.
And decides to abandon humanity for 10 years because people don't like me as much anymore.
Yeah.
And I understand again,
Oh,
there's
for the love
an
of...
element of pride motivating his decisions, which he needs to
Nope.
abandon
No.
later
No.
on toward the end of the story so that
Stop.
he can fully...
Stop. Okay, so not only do you have it backwards in the fact that you can't even see Superman's crisis of faith for what it is, you have it so backwards that you think he is suffering from the sin of pride rather than from a like Christ in the wilderness style crisis of faith. Dark Night of the Soul, that's the phrase I was looking for. You have it so backwards that you think he is suffering from the sin of pride rather than from a Dark Night of the Soul, a crisis of faith. You hate idealistic altruism so much that you are now equating it with the sin of fucking pride when a very sane alternative quote-unquote Christian interpretation of this is Superman. If you absolutely insist on him being a Christ-like figure, this is his, 40 days of wandering in the desert. This is his Dark Night of the Soul, etc. But again, you apparently have it so backwards and so screwed in your head that you would rather charge Superman, who's actually in this instance being the Christ-like figure that you want him to be, with the sin of pride for having his 40 days in the desert crisis of faith. Holy fucking shit. When the Antichrist shows up, you guys will cheer for him. I swear to fucking God. Literally. I'm not even a Christian and I understand this fucking point better than they do. How is this even fucking possible? But,
embrace the mantle that he's supposed to, leave the darkness of the pride behind him so he can become more of an inspiration again.
fucking
But
hell.
it does mean that every decision that Superman makes, other than returning in the first place, is a bad decision, is a stupid decision.
He's very emotional and excessive.
Okay, yeah.
Go ahead, Brainstormer. Go ahead. I'll go after you, but go ahead.
How? Not only, and I actually looked at this video earlier and looked at the comments, and a lot of people don't like this video.
Because I assume even their own audience are pointing out how they're fucking morons.
Yeah. But saying that he's too emotional is moronic. Hold on. Because
I will
It's
hold my tongue.
it's Superman's heart, his humanity, that is his greatest strength as well as weakness. To be fair, there is a video essay that I can probably send in Discord at some point by this YouTuber called Sage's Reign, that talks about Superman and his humanity and like its whole thing. But that's kind of his whole that besides hope, I would say humanity, all the positive aspects of humanity and some negative, mind you, because he is a person. I feel like a lot of people constantly forget that about him. He's an individual. He's
Right.
He's Clark Kent. Superman is what he can do. Clark Kent is who he is. As a person, his personality, his beliefs.
Go ahead.
I realize you and I have had this discussion before. I understand where you're coming from, but what I mean is Superman is a symbol, and it's the actualization of Clark Kent. I will give you. I will say that.
Yeah.
All of his goodness,
To-
his want to help people and stuff like that.
To-
That's what
to
Superman
some-
is.
To summarize my perspective vis-a-vis the whole Clark Kent v Superman thing, I say there are three personas. There is Superman, there is Clark Kent as he actually is, and then there is the Clark Kent persona he puts on to distance himself from Superman. Clark Kent as he actually is different from the Clark Kent that he shows to people. In my and again, this goes back to us having different touchstones and points of reference for this. In my opinion, this is why I like Smallville so much, because it shows not just the difference between Clark Kent and Superman, but also Clark Kent the person and Clark Kent the mask, the red herring. But that's neither here nor there. Back on to explaining why these people are fucking morons. Clark Kent is always emotional because that is who he is. Superman is not a rationalistic hero. That's why Zack Snyder is a fucking moron. That's why so many people appear to just not understand who Superman is. He is innocent. He is pure. He is humble. He is naive. These things are all true, but where I and presumably Brainstormer disagree with most people who don't understand why that's a good thing, disagree with people, is we see that naivete of his, that, yes, childlike simplicity, if you absolutely must call it that. That is what gives him his power, because it prevents him from being rationalistically argued out of his position, like Lex Luthor keeps trying to make him be. That there is in fact the difference. If you need it to be explained to you so fundamentally, and by the way, you would think that you two assholes who work for the Lotus Eaters would be the first people to understand this point, because you guys keep saying how the classically liberal approach to try to rationalize everything is bad and fails and robs people of their humanity. And yet, even when you are faced with a character who is the perfect example of your own fucking argument, you call him a whiny little bitch for being the simplistically childlike, emotional paragon that he is, for being a whiny little bitch. You call him whiny for being emotionally centered, while you also are quite fond of pointing out that classical liberalism tries erroneously to rationalize and bureaucratize everything. Do you see how, one, you appear to have failed your own principles insofar as you have any, and two, do you see how this is you getting everything completely back to front? You're seeing Superman go through his 40 days of wandering in the desert, a la Christ, as him succumbing to the sin of pride, and you're seeing the very emotionality, the very purity of soul, of spirit, and of mind that makes him the paragon that he is, as his weakness, and you want him to grow out of it by becoming a pragmatic rationalist, like a Lex Luthor or a Batman or the Punisher. And again, there's nothing wrong with two of the three of those, because Lex Luthor, as stated, is the negative side of Ayn Rand's like Superman dream. But there's nothing wrong with a Batman, and there's nothing wrong with the Punisher. But nor is there anything wrong with a character whose purity is so sacrosanct that that being bad simply doesn't occur to him. That is Superman's biggest strength. It's not just that he is resistant to the darkness, is that he's so resistant to the darkness that the darkness usually doesn't even occur to him unless someone forcefully points it out to him. As I've often dichotomized it, Batman is a guy who uses darkness to fight darkness. Superman is a light that burns so bright that the darkness cannot touch it. End of discussion.
Let me use that tab. I do think we're going to call it pretty soon.
Yep. Let's try to get at least like one more minute in.
Be reactive rather than reasonable.
Well, he's massively idealistic where he should be pragmatic. One of the big decisions that he makes is when they start to round up all of the newfangled superheroes who are causing death and destruction on the street, is that he goes to Apocalypse and speaks to Orion, Darkseid's son. And,
Pause.
Orion.
You are criticizing Superman for being an idealist. Tell me you have never actually meaningfully engaged with a single Superman comic without telling me you have never meaningfully engaged with a single Superman comic. That is who Superman is and has been, barring the very, very earliest years of the Golden Age. As in, we're talking about the same time period when Batman actually still used guns. That is how early into either of these characters you have to dig to find that contradiction in the rest of their character. But around the same time Batman stopped using guns because of obvious fucking backstory reasons, Superman stopped being a chauvinistic bully and became innocence and purity and light incarnate. And he has remained that for the last 85 years at least. Fucking hell, people. But unless you want to have your go at them, because my god, that is the single most
Honestly,
they don't get it I've ever heard.
Yeah, honestly, I think you got it. So.
But
Ryan just says to him explicitly, listen, if you've got a problem, I've got problems here, but it's nothing I can't handle. Send them all here if you want somewhere to hold these people. Superman decides against this for no other reason than, that's not what I do. He's like, people keep saying in this that if I do the obviously right choice, they keep saying, well, that makes me a fascist.
Yeah.
God forbid he should have principles. And again, yes, it is very important both in and out of universe that Superman approach things with a very, very light touch, because he is so powerful that honestly, the power scaling of Superman is such that there's a quote that usually gets applied to Lovecraftian creatures that does at least somewhat apply to Superman in terms of power scaling, which is the Lovecraftian monsters don't destroy things out of malice, they destroy things by rolling over in bed, the way a human destroys bed bugs. And Superman's power scaling is maybe not entirely equivalent to that, but at least somewhat approaching that, i.e., the smallest amount of his power is enough to declare himself the Emperor of Earth. He could literally destroy the planet he is walking on by walking on it too hard. And as such, both as a person, philosophically, and for, like, pragmatic material reasons, if you absolutely must give him those, he knows that both literally and metaphorically, both literally and, like, abstract philosophically, he can't get into politics. He can't become the authoritarian arbiter of anything, because once he starts down that road, the only thing preventing him from being the God King of Earth is his own principles. And his principles are the very things that you are telling him to get rid of, because you would prefer he be more of a pragmatist. And again, I must point out, we are bugs physically relative to Superman. So if he starts treating us like bugs, what is the difference between letting a bug go outside your house with the like cup and magazine type thing and just squishing it? I'm not saying there's no difference, and there certainly are people who would make such a difference. But from a human perspective, do we really agonize over having to squash a bug? No, we do not. If Superman started taking that approach to humans, it's a Boschian hellscape with authoritarian overtones. But
Yeah, about 20 more seconds. So.
Yep.
Yep.
I'm not going to do the obviously right choice, and you can see Mark Waid's completely stupid ideological predilections forcing the characters into these positions. So what he does instead of being a fascist, all he does is construct a gigantic gulag in the middle of the irradiated Kansas wasteland,
modeled on the Legion of Doom.
Okay. Wait a second here. Hold on. Hold everything. While I am sure that Mark Waid did distort things, because Mark Waid is an idiot and an edgy twat, and he always kind of has been. He just used to be a hack with talent. Now he's just a hack. But as much as I will grant you that Mark Waid might be distorting things because Mark Waid is a hack, the things to which you are referring, the things you have highlighted here as examples of Mark Waid's distortion, are not in any way new add-ons to Superman as a character. They are Superman as he has been written since the war years. And I will give you an example of Superman approaching things from a very pacifistic, light touch approach from the freaking war years, just so that we know that our and everyone else's approach to Superman goes back just as far as yours, or just about as far as yours, and is in fact more indicative of the character. When Superman is tasked with apprehending Adolf Hitler, does he A, beat the living fuck out of Adolf Hitler so as to give some catharsis to the Holocaust survivors? Does he B, lock Adolf into a cell and torture him so that he knows what it's like to feel like a Holocaust survivor? Or does he C, harmlessly pick him up and fly him without physical damage to the UN so he can stand trial properly?
C.
Duh. Exactly. So, if you want to argue that Superman should be more of a pragmatic opportunist bully, which again, I will grant you that in the very earliest part of the Golden Age, he was a little bit, because they didn't really figure out. Frankly, a lot of early comic book writers didn't realize that these characters were going to have as much longevity as they would, so they didn't really think much of their character from one issue to the next in the early years. I will give you that Superman used to be a little bit more of a chauvinist bully. But for the last 75 years, that's not been the case, as I've just demonstrated by referencing the war years. So you are telling me that you think Superman's idealism is something Mark Waid or the guy who wrote What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way invented, and that the chauvinist, bully, pragmatist part of Superman is more indicative of his character than the purer than driven snow idealistic altruist who has a very naive, in the positive sense, morality. You clearly haven't read the last 75 years of Superman comics, because that is how far back you have to dig to get to Superman behaving more like a bully, because they didn't really think he should have an established character yet at that point. But as soon as he did, he became the symbol of light, goodness, and purity. And he remains the symbol of light, goodness, and purity here. It's just that you don't like the organic implications of being that symbol of purity. Anyway, and yes, so outro.
Intro. It's like that one thing everyone was flipping out about when someone made a comic panel of Naruto trying to talk no jutsu Hitler as sort of a meme / thought experiment.
Yeah, except Superman literally that's Superman's preferred modus operandi. Superman is more of a master of talk no jutsu than Naruto is in most cases. He only hits when the people he's trying to deal with have given him no other option.
Yeah. So yeah, folks. With that, I want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, avidazai, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
Shalom. Remember, pluralism is the way, and fuck off.